I've seen a lot. Amid the celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Welcome to the show. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in and listening. This is a little offbeat conversation we're going to have today, but it stems from a lot of conversations that I've been having, oddly enough, about and with divorcees and business and managing, the business, the separation of a business. And so I am from a divorced family. I don't know what the appropriate words are, but so my guests today are my current wife, Tennille. Thank you for being here, baby. Appreciate it. And my ex-wife, Terri. Thank you very much for being here, baby.
Good to be here.
So I texted a couple of my buddies to see what they thought about this idea, and they're like, "Are you out of your mind? You're going to have your ex-wife and your wife on the podcast." But the conversation really, is about how to manage and overcome the obstacles of, being divorced, how to grow from that, how to grow with it. What are some of the things that, we need to balance? Anyways, we're not perfect at it, but there was a day where, the three of us were never in a room together. And now we literally, are blessed and with the ability to be, super close friends, like very, very close. We do holidays together. We've taken vacations together. We do business trips together, but, and that extends to your significant other, Neil, as well. And so, we're super grateful for the extended family that we have. I consider Neil's son like a son to us. Anyways, long intro. But I guess maybe we'll just start talking about divorce. Maybe we'll maybe start a little bit with the story. So we were in business together, Terri and I, and we owned some restaurants together. And so we got divorced. How many years has it been?
Well, Spencer will be 23. So,
no. So 22 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. 21, 20, yeah, 20. We got divorced or we got separated when he was basically born. And it was funny, like even that, I think I might get beat up a little bit on the show, and I'm okay with that. Not from you guys being beat up, but I'll be corrected a lot because men have a tendency, or at least for sure I have a tendency, but a lot of men have a tendency to kind of box things up, put it in a little package, bury it as far down as you can, and not revisit it, because what's the point? So my timelines will probably be off, and so I'm sure you guys will help me with this, and I'm more than happy for that to happen. But it was 22 years ago when we got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, do you want to share the story?
It's interesting because even though it's 22 years ago, that's the past. Everyone has their own perception, because you say about boxing things up. It's all been dealt with. I'm so grateful that we're still in each other's lives in the degree that we're in each other's lives. It was a hard time, I'm not going to lie, back then. But I'm a big believer in the universe. And I don't think it's what the universe, like us, that's not what the universe had laid out for us. You're with the person who you're meant to be with. And yeah, I'll get all choked up because I'm a big sap. But Yeah, looking back, it wasn't easy and it's taken a long time to get where we are, but I wouldn't change what we have. I'm beyond grateful for what we have.
And thank you for that. Like, and I agree with it. But 22 years ago, that's not what it was like. 22 years ago, we were coming out of well, obviously it was a dysfunctional might sound a little extreme, but it was a dysfunctional. We decided to get divorced, and so we had ultimately, I think I'll put it on my shoulders. I ultimately decided that I wanted to get a divorce. And part of that wasn't like, really, for our story, I think it wasn't like it was unbearable, but I honestly felt like, okay, this is not going to last the test of time. I felt that I was ill-equipped to, and I didn't know this at the time, but I was ill-equipped to meet your needs. Well, that was a fast agreement.
No,
No, I'm kidding.
no. It's funny because gosh, you don't think, I haven't thought about it for years. I will commend you with your personality. One of the wonderful things about your personality is you have those difficult conversations. You always have. We were young. 25. I was 25 when I got in the business. I didn't know what I was doing, basically. And you're right. I don't think we were meeting each other's needs. Obviously, that's what leads to separation and divorce. Spencer was born. I moved back to London on my own. I didn't want to move back in with my parents. It was a very difficult time trying to navigate. And then I was coming back and forth from London to Toronto for marriage counseling sessions. That's kind of what I remember.
Yeah, and it's funny how, like, as time goes by, and I think this is probably one of the first lessons if anybody's going through this or it's recent is, there's that saying, time heals all wounds, like, or at least, if you decide to let them go. If you carry them or harbor them inside, then they will foster and fester. And so I think that's actually a really good point. But I also think, like, there were a couple points, and I don't know if this is actually true, but I mean, we were really, really busy in the business back then. And I distinctly remember you saying, as we were kind of trying to work things through, you kind of had said to me at one point, I just want to be the most important thing to you in your life. And I'll never, ever forget it, or at least how I frame it. But you said that, and I said, well, you are the most important thing. But I've got the business, and I've got this going on, and I've got Spencer, and this, which means in code, if you're a guy, a woman wants to be the most important thing in your life. And at that time, I didn't know that. I didn't understand it. And I basically, my response was, yes, you are, but no, you're not. And you felt that. I think you felt that deep in your soul, that you you weren't the most important thing in my life and at that time it was probably true. I mean, like, you made a really good point. You were 25. I think I was like 28 or 29. And when I say, like, I was completely ill-equipped, I had never read a book on relationships. I had read a gajillion books on business, uh, you know, and I was trying to carve my way, in business. So I was completely self-centered, and not focused on, you know, the whole picture of really what it took to be in a relationship that is, um, that's like kind of a level 3 relationship where, my needs are your needs and your needs are my needs, which is, kind of, coming full circle. That's kind of where I've gotten through a ton of, education and a ton of, working with marriage counselors and just counselors in general for understanding what it is that women need. So, and that's, kind of where, Tennille and I've gotten to. But yeah, I don't know if, and we're not at that level where it's like, oh, could it have worked? Could it have not worked? I don't think it would have worked because we're different people.
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't know how to choose a partner. Like, I didn't even understand that, at that age. And
it's so funny because all of my learnings now in the past few years, I try to, I talk to the boys about it, Spencer and Nick. And I say to them, I'm telling you this so that you can implement it in your own relationships. Because females, there's a certain amount of vulnerability with females. We have to feel safe. And I think looking back all those years, I know I didn't talk to you. I'm not the greatest communicator, but I have to feel safe in order to do that and in order to open up. And we were exhausted back then, working the amount of hours that we were. I don't think I agree with you. I don't think it wasn't destined to last.
Yeah, well, I mean, you make a really good point. How you said, and by boys, just for clarification to the listeners, the boys are Spencer, who is our son, and then Nick, who is your stepson, and who we consider literally, don't we, babe? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, we consider him a stepson to us. But those are the three things. Like, that's one of the three things that you said. Like, when a woman needs to feel safe, that is, the third of the three U's that a woman needs, which is if they feel unsafe, that is, a makes it very difficult for a woman to connect. And I think too, like, I mean, I was such an intense person. Well, I am an intense person. But my emotional home is anger. And so I would go, to anger, pissed off, frustrated. And like you said, like, we were tired, we were exhausted. We had just started our own business. We were stretched 6 ways from Sunday. And so, our state in, your ability to manage your state is very difficult.
Can I say a funny story?
Yeah,
because when you're
uh-oh.
I know it's meant to be funny, but you say about the state, you are still an intense person, but it's dissipated greatly over the years. And the funny story is bringing Spencer home from the hospital. We're new parents. We've never done this before, and we couldn't quite get, and I don't know if you'll remember this, we couldn't quite get the car seat, Spencer to fit in the car seat. So we had to wait for somebody to come and help with that. And I think there was a lactation consultant that was coming in or whatever. And you were training for a bodybuilding show at that time. And you could tell
So I had the patience of Job.
Yeah. Your intensity was growing. Your anger was growing more and more and more. And I say this, I'm not saying bringing this up too.
No, it's okay.
But I walked out of the hospital, which is supposed to be one of the greatest joys in your life. And I walked out of the hospital with my head down and tears dripping out of my eyes because you were in such a pissed off state. The joy was taken away, and we stopped at McDonald's on the way home because you were so hungry. And at that point, I was in a state myself because I was intimidated. And you tried to pass me a hamburger, and I will never forget, you threw the hamburger clear across the car because I wouldn't eat it. And that's why I say you're still intense, but you were a different person then
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, there's no question I'm a different person, but I still get like that sometimes. Like sometimes, I mean, I think the whole point to that, I think the great part to that story is, number one, it's like, look, this is who I am. And I work very hard at, not losing my temper as much, but I still do. And I think sometimes you have to be, give yourself a little grace.
Yep.
And and the problem with that is like, especially like anger, like I lived it. You can, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The more that you hate on yourself for being angry, right? So you're basically being angry at yourself for being angry, which only precipitates more anger or more frustration. And then you're kind of beating yourself up. And it wasn't really until, I went through a process and an exercise that helped me, really have more self-love and more self-appreciation and not beating myself up and not judging myself for, my anger. And I don't condone anger, and I certainly don't condone violence. I mean, I've never hit a woman, and I've hit lots of guys, but the it is understanding and appreciating who you are and looking to evolve the the growth side of that. And so I love the story because I think it helps the listener to kind of understand where we were at the time, and we're describing, and this is the thing, guys. If you're in business and you're in a marriage and your marriage is struggling, we've already covered a whole bunch of things, and I just want to make sure that I cap them off here. But one was like, manage your state, like or at least be aware of your state and have a conversation about it. It's like, hey, babe, this was a really horrible day, and I'm not in a good state right now. I need to, go for a walk, go for a run, do 20 push-ups, meditate, read a book. I need just some silence. I need to watch the game for 15 minutes or whatever it is that you do to kind of bring yourself down and get yourself back in a better state. And communicate that, because people in a relationship, and whether it could be on the other foot, right? There's lots of women in business. So, they're coming home and they got the kids clamoring after them and they got like all this stuff. And then when you're in a low state, you can get very easily snappy. And so, I would never recommend anybody doing a bodybuilding show with a newborn baby because that was not, in hindsight, was not a good move. So now what I do is I would buy two of those car seats, one that I can beat with a baseball bat, and then the other one I'd put in. Anyways, so sorry, we talked about state. I think like that's a real critical piece. And then just to go back to what you'd brought up, which was, the beginning of the 3 U's. And so for women, it's like, it's unseen, not understood, and unsafe, and the feeling of unsafe. And so, that is critical, for the men out here who are listening. If you want to light your woman up, those are kind of the 3 things that they need. They need to be seen, they need to be understood, and they need to feel safe. And so that is our role to, really hone in on that. Regardless of what your state is, you've got to try to manage that. And then and for women who are listening to this, because I don't want to, make this a guy thing. But, on the other side, men have 3 C's, which is,
not to be criticized, not to be controlled,
and closed off. I think.
not to be closed, which kind of goes back to the state of, what Terri had said is, if you don't feel safe, it's virtually an uphill battle for a woman to be open and be vulnerable and be communicative and all of those things. So as soon as there's a feeling of not being safe, or it's not a safe space to say what you want to say or how you feel, then immediately you go to closed off. And then I feel like you just get into that figure 8 circle of no one can come out of that low state, and it just perpetuates the argument or the feelings of disconnect.
Shut down. Yeah.
Yeah, you shut down.
Yeah.
And nothing good can come from that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think when a woman shuts down, the man then feels like he's failing, and then once a man feels like he's failing, then they virtually kind of give up. It's the feminine energy that really drives, like feminine energy drives masculine energy. Masculine energy is, very responsive to feminine energy. You can have the masculine energy low, and things will still maintain a successful path forward if the feminine energy is high, because a feminine energy lifts things up, whereas masculine energy follows the feminine energy. And if the feminine energy closes off, then men just respond to it and close off on their own. And then they feel that they get into a position of, well, I can't succeed at this. And then they'll search elsewhere. Whether that's, it could be with a woman, it could be they may be, it might be sports, it might be golf, it could be like they're always leaving the home, taking off, spending their time elsewhere, or their energy goes elsewhere. And so that's a big piece. And I think too, like in the beginning, that's probably some of the feelings that I had when I felt like I couldn't win.
I would get that. Yeah.
And that
I can see that.
that wasn't because of you, but it was just because exactly what we just talked about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like you didn't feel seen because I was so busy and I was working all the time. You've got this newborn baby. You didn't feel safe necessarily. I mean, I'm sure you felt physically safe in terms of my ability to protect you in the home, but you didn't feel safe because my state was so low and I'd lose my temper, and we weren't communicating well and all that shit. And
Well, it's interesting too, because one of your sayings, where focus goes, energy flows. And
I think that's actually Tony Robbins saying.
oh, sorry, it's not going there. Well, speaking of Tony Robbins, you got engrossed in Awaken the Giant Within. That was your Bible. You carried that everywhere. The highlighted pages, notes, everything. And back then, I thought to myself, why can't he put that much effort into us that he is into the book? Because relationships require effort. And I didn't feel I was getting that out of you. And I was ill-equipped to communicate that to you. I know that now, but I didn't know that back then. So I guess teaching the listeners, you do have to put just as much. You guys teach relationship stuff, you guys coach it, but you have to put the effort into your relationship like you do other things.
But I think to your point, where do people learn that? Like the average person may never come across any of that information. And they don't teach it in schools. They don't necessarily teach it. You have to know which resources to go to in order to find this information, but it will change your life. You can either have a great, incredible relationship full of love and fulfillment, or you could have a horrible relationship and not know what you're doing wrong, not know that you're closing it off, not know how to open, not know how to fill a man's needs, not know how to express yourself, or how to, if you're both in a low state, somebody's got to come out of that state, and somebody's got to go first, and somebody's got to invest the time in themselves so that they can bring forth to the relationship their best possible version. And that's never going to go away. That's a never ending process. And I don't feel like most people have the access to the resources, or not access. They don't know where to find those resources. They don't know that men and women communicate so differently, and that it's
true.
A mirror reaction. So you close, and then they feel like they can't win, and then they're going to go where they can win, whether that's business, whether that's sports, whether that's bodybuilding competition, wherever that adrenaline rush of I am successful, I can do this is going to hit, is where it's going to peel their attention. But how do you how do you learn to fulfill that within the relationship constantly, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're in a low state, even when your energy is low, even when hormones are crazy, even when the kids are distracting you from all of that. It's like, how do I refocus? But I think, from an outsider's perspective, because I knew you guys both at that point in time, the odds were also stacking. New business, tons of stress. You guys are growing that business like crazy. I knew you both. You're both young. You hadn't lived together. Then you decided to have a kid. It's like, okay, like, so one level maybe you could handle, then two, then three, then four, then five. And it became like this mountain that, I have the privilege of knowing you both and loving you both. But I think that was a huge mountain to climb at that point. So early in your lives, so early in trying to achieve so much.
Yeah, which is kind of funny to mention. Like, we were all friends 20 years ago or whatever, or whenever it was, and you were in a relationship with a good friend of ours now, and we were all actually kind of involved in the same industry, and so there was a knowingness there for you guys. But T, you just had made a really good comment about, and I might ask you guys, because you've both been married to somebody who's been in business. So, maybe you guys could draw some conclusions on this, but like you said, it's easier for a guy to put his energy somewhere else, whether it's whatever it is, but it's a business podcast. And many of the people who are listening, whether they're guys or girls, they they'll put their energy into their business, because they also feel like they are contributing for the family. If you ask a lot of people who own business, like, I'm doing this for the family, and, or I'm doing it for the kids, where the kids would be like, well, we'd actually rather have you at home, not working 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day or whatever. But, we fool ourselves to believing that, that we're serving a higher purpose. And when we're really kind of potentially running from, I'm not saying it's just that, but if there's a problem in the relationship at home with the husband and wife, that they're, closing off and their energy is going to somewhere where they feel like they could be successful. So
I would totally agree with that. And I would say, like, it's easier to see it because there's a scoreboard in business. There's not necessarily a clear scoreboard in your relationship. It's how you feel in the moment, but you don't necessarily know how the other person feels or whether you're winning or losing, and where the score is at. Is it a winnable game? Can I win this game, or is this destined to fail? And at that point, I'd rather put it into my business where I can see a result. I can change something today and I'm instantly going to see a result, or I'm going to see a result in a month or a year or whatever that looks like. And in a relationship, it's kind of blind faith. You're putting in that time, you're putting in that effort, and you're looking for those signs, and you're trying to be aware of, did that one hit? Did that one resonate with her or him? But you don't necessarily know. You're going off a feeling and hopefully some great communication. I think the other part to that, when you said that, is in today's society, there are a lot of women who are in C-suite or ownership positions. I mean, Terri owns her own business. There is a certain masculine energy that comes with that, or the perception that sometimes you have to be in your masculine and stubbornness to really achieve what you're destined to achieve. And I think when you're in that masculine energy, you also act in the same way. So you're looking for the scoreboard, you're looking for the win, you're looking to not relent, you're looking to, fulfill those needs within yourself. And I think a lot of women in business feel like they need to lead more from a masculine energy to be powerful, to be the decision maker, to forge forward.
I know I do. I don't come from a business background. I've got a nursing background. When we were together, I think I was like a glorified supervisor, basically. And when I branched off on my own, I'm 100% self-taught. I mean, I consult you guys frequently, but I've taught myself P&Ls. I've taught myself so many things, and I'm so unbelievably proud of myself. Made a tremendous amount of mistakes over the years, but I have this stubbornness in me that I will not let myself fail. I've come close to it numerous times, but I always come through. And
Well, I'll say this actually, like one of the, I think the points that you guys were having a conversation about, which I thought was awesome, which was, there's a scoreboard in business, and there's not necessarily a scoreboard at home. So my question would be, for women and for men out there, what would a scoreboard look like? Not to put you on the spot, but
But
I will, because I think it's important. It's an extremely important point, and it's actually a point where I go, do we necessarily have a scoreboard? I mean, we often ask ourselves, like, are we happy? What can we do more? All that kind of stuff. But those who are struggling, it's like, how do you train a child to, go poo poo in the potty, right? You don't give them shit for crapping on the floor on their way to the toilet. We celebrate. We're like, oh my God, you almost made it. That's amazing. And they shit on the floor. It's like, but you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And what we don't do that often enough is in relationships. And so I'd be keen or curious to know, what would be, the 3 things that you'd put on a scoreboard, each of you, in order to, sorry, I don't mean to, but I'm also happy to talk through it too. But what would be, like, even one idea of, so a couple can sit down and go, listen, like, we need to figure out if we're winning or losing this game.
yeah, I can start. I think that for me, and I think it might be a little bit different for each individual woman, but for me, I would say that a lot of that would come down to women communicate in a very different way. We want to know all the ins and outs of each situation. So we want to know what's right, what's wrong, what's happening. And that level of open communication is so near and dear to us feeling safe. So when they all tie together, it's like, if you will tell me how I can better show up, if you will share with me where you're not happy, then I also have a trust in that if we hit a rough spot, I'm not going to be blindsided. I'm going to be aware, and I'm going to have an opportunity to put my best foot forward and try and find the parts within me that are preventing us from connecting on that level. So I would say, like, that level of open communication, and not doing it in anger, not doing it in frustration, not doing it in the midst of an argument, but just sitting down and having a coffee. And, we have this practice every anniversary. It's kind of down to 1 or 2 things now, but it's, where do you feel we're at, and what could I do better? How
My
could I?
list years ago was huge.
No, it wasn't. You're such an exaggerator. It was not, for all the listeners. But
how do you measure that, though? What you were just saying?
honestly, I think it comes down to just it's not it's a feeling. For at least from a woman's standpoint, if I'm talking to you, I know whether you mean what you're saying. I can feel it. I'm not going to speak for a man because I've not lived in that body, but you can feel innately whether you feel they're coming from their heart, they're being transparent, they're being honest with you, especially when they're delivering something that they know you're not going to want to hear. Like, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you anyways, because in the end of the day, it's through those struggles, it's through that honesty that we're going to find a way forward, because most people don't. They fail to say the important things. They fail to ask for what they want in the relationship. They fail to be transparent with each other. And then they sit in a lawyer's office and wonder why it ended. And to me, it's like you have to be vulnerable. You have to lead with your heart, or you're not going to get what you want. And for me, that's in everything. Like, I know this is obviously a business podcast, but you're not going to get what you want out of life, whether that be business, health, finances, relationship. I don't believe you can do that without finding some openness and vulnerability within yourself, and opening yourself up to being hurt or hearing things that you don't want to hear as a leader, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter, as a mother. That is, to me, where you find fulfillment.
I think it's interesting in business. I find it much easier to communicate in business than I do in personal relationships. I coach my staff. You can ask anyone on my leadership team. Take the emotion out of it, and it's just business is business. Because I don't have a business partner. I have to have those difficult conversations on my own, and I'm pretty good at them now. It's taken me years to get to this point, but it doesn't so much intimidate me anymore. On a personal note, though, I'm not very good at it. I will admit that.
I think on a personal note, it's so much harder.
Yes, because there's emotion attached.
There's so much emotion attached, and it stacks at work. And especially, like, obviously you run your restaurants, and I head up our restaurants at this point in time. And it's easy to walk in there and have a coaching conversation and have a conversation with a manager or employee. And it can be heartfelt. It can be a disciplinary, whatever that is, because you know that you can walk away from it, and you know what the upside is, you know what the downside is. You're prepared to deal with the downside if that's the way it goes. But in a relationship, there's so much more at risk, and it's so much, it requires so much more of yourself, and to put on a completely different hat. And I think, this is a little bit of a side note, but I used to go into work, and when we were first dating, it was an ongoing joke because we still use the uniforms to go into work. And as soon as I put on my uniform, I was like a different person. Like, I went into work mode. You couldn't talk to me. It was like, I'm ready to go and achieve. And I would say, like, that was a very masculine energy for me, but I put that hat on, and not literally a hat, but put my uniform on, and that was it. Like, there was no communication. There was no relationship stuff. There was like a kiss goodbye, and off I go to try and win at work.
So it's it's a great story that you bring up, because literally we got to the point, well, this is when we started getting deep into our relationship training. So we identified the fact that there was, that like her masculine energy was really strong when it came to her prepping for her day. And part of that was, putting on the uniform, just like Superman or Wonder Woman would put on their uniform. Right. And so we got to the point where she would be the last thing she did before she left the house. And then I'd just hide in the bathroom. No, just kidding. But it was
it's no lingerie.
Thank you for, it's no lingerie.
Definitely not.
But it's funny because I was going to ask the two questions I was going to ask around. I have a couple questions, actually 2 or 3 questions here, but the 2 of them are just around this recent conversation here with the masculine energy and feminine energy, and also having the conversations easier at home or at work than at home in your intimate relationships. Is, the 2 things that popped into my head was, one, is that masculine energy, are you coming from a masculine energy place, which the 2 of you guys don't have a lot of masculine energy, just from knowing you, but that would be one question. And then the other question was, or is there a greater level of fear, towards, the outcome, which you kind of alluded to when you were talking, T. So that would be, I guess those were kind of my 2 things that popped into my head I'd be curious about.
I would say it's fear. The fear of being wrong. Yeah, I would say more fear of being selfish, coming at it from only my perspective, um, making it about me and what I want and what I need rather than about the other person. I mean, I think that plays into
Fear of pissing me off.
no, no,
as Terry already eloquently told us. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, sometimes you don't know how what you have to say or what you have to feel is going to land. And I think, and I don't know if Terry can relate because we've honestly never had these conversations
so
per
true.
se. Is you also, as a female or in your feminine energy, have a million conversations going on in your head at any given time. So it's okay. Well, if this happens, then this could happen, and Lord knows we play out the worst possible scenario. So if this conversation goes wrong, that's it. We're getting divorced and it's all over. And, we can take it to the nth degree. But I think that it all comes from a fear of not being enough, a fear of not being loved. Those two core fears is if I say what I'm feeling right now, or if I have this conversation, what does that mean about myself? Because we're our worst critics.
Yes, women just want to feel heard, and men want to fix everything. And sometimes we don't want to be fixed. Sometimes we just want to talk.
I did this
And
to Dwayne the other day.
I know men. I know men. Some men. I shouldn't say all men. Aren't equipped for that, I guess.
Well, I mean, we really want to solve the problem, right? It's what are the three things? What's the problem? How do I solve it? Or how do I fix it? And there's a third one, it'll come to me, but that's kind of how we look for problems. And our 5 million year old brain, when you go back to 5 million years ago, where men were hunters and women were gatherers, and they would go out, and we had one sole thing to do was go kill the tiger or whatever it was, bring home the meat for the tribe, and women's responsibilities were everything else. And which is, and that's why you have this discrepancy between how men and women see things. Like down to there's studies that show that men have a much more, their line of sight is more narrow than a woman's. A woman has like 180-degree peripheral vision, and men have more of a very honed in peripheral vision. So those are the kinds of things that have been developed over, centuries and centuries and centuries, millions of years, in order for us to protect ourselves and be safe and survive. And so you're, on one side, you're asking a man to, unwind 5 million years of predatorial brain activity that's ingrained in them. And so, it's an interesting kind of dichotomy, which at the end of the day, look, can you change it? Absolutely, you can. I'm mildly better. I wouldn't say I'm not 50% better for sure.
It's a lot better.
Well, I would say I'm mildly better. But you're also not in my head. It's like, okay, robot, okay, what's next? What do I say next? It's, we're very linearly geared for most of us, not all of us.
It's a valid point though, because I often think of it. Remember the ski vacation we took? Dwayne wasn't there.
Yeah. It's a Blue Mountain.
Oh, horrible. With Neil.
Took the kids. and Terry.
And I'm a horrible skier. I so badly I want to be a good skier, and I'm not. And it's funny because you get into your own head and you tell the story. And one of the stories I tell myself is, I don't matter and I suck. And I can laugh at it because I know how silly that sounds. But that's the story that's in my head. And Neil and Tennille were at the bottom of the hill waiting for me. I think you guys actually went
We
down.
cheered you on.
I think you went down another time though.
We did laugh at you.
And I was livid at the end, not towards you guys, but just beating myself up. So it's, you say about the story you tell yourself. Absolutely. Everybody has a story that's in their head.
Well, and that's the big, that's part of the big thing. Sorry, before I get back on the story, I do want to go back and ask you guys. So when you were talking about, I had written down 3 things in terms of the scoreboard at home, which is showing up, connecting, open communication. I mean, a couple of ones that I think we've already talked about that I think could be thrown on that list is, as a woman, do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Proximity, are you spending enough time together? And is it quality time?
Love languages.
Love languages might be another, right? There's a whole bunch of resources out there, but and I don't know if this is a good idea. It's the idea that popped into my head, but I'm also a guy. So I'm going to say this with a grain of salt because it's probably not a good idea. But for me, it's like, okay, great. Like, tell me on a scale from 1 to 10, where am I at? And what do I need to do to go from a 6 to a 7 and a 7 to an 8? And if you have patience for me, I will work at trying to get there. But is that a thing for women, or is that no? Is that because you guys had been like, no, it's a feeling, and I'm like, well, I don't understand that.
So I think, so we've done that. I remember when we were going through some struggles, we literally wrote out like different characteristics about each other or things that we wanted to have in our relationship, and we did rate them. I think I would probably say that it depends on who your partner is and where they're at. Because if they are already their worst critic and they are already beating themselves up and they are already feeling as though the demise or the situation that the relationship is in or the marriage is in is a result of them and their failures, seeing a rating that might add to their story could perpetuate a bigger story than it already is. I'm not to say it's not a good idea. I just think it really is dependent on who that person is and how they process information and how willing they are. When you propose that, did you get a verbal confirmation that they were like, oh yes, I'll take anything. I'll take any tool right now. Just give me the information. Or did they go like, oh, I'm not sure about this. Like, this might just be my scorecard to find out I'm failing and that I'm really not enough and that he really doesn't love me anymore. And then what am I going to do? And those are all the things that are going to play out depending on the person, which is, is so key in my opinion, that when you're going through this, and it's just as important, it really is a 50-50 split, that both people are invested in learning the communication, because if only one person knows, it's not going to necessarily result in the outcome that you think it is.
So what do you do if you have, from a female's perspective, if you're interested in, working on the relationship and you've found a resource, whether it be whatever, a course or a book or an audio tape and whatever it is, or maybe it's a podcast, whatever. And your partner is not excited / interested, or is hesitant to want to partake in that. What would be, some of the advice that you guys would give to a woman if they have a husband that's, he's gotten to the point where he's spending all his energies in his business. You're feeling unseen, unheard. The relationship is deteriorating to the point where, you're not happy. He's not happy. You're in it because of the kids or whatever your story is, whatever the situation has become. And the next step is probably, separation / divorce. What do you do?
It's a great question. I honestly, I can't answer that. I can't. I can say I'm listening to some incredible podcasts and reading and everything right now. I'll run into Spencer's room and, oh my God, you got to listen to this. It's amazing. Um, I just know that you can't get worked up about the trivial things at home or in your personal lives, but when your needs aren't being met, and emotional needs, et cetera, there are all kind of needs. I don't know what the next step is. I maybe Tennille can.
Yeah, I think that in those situations, each person, there is an onus that you have to learn how to not put the pressure of fulfilling your needs on the other person. There needs to be some self-ownership in that, where you go, it's not their responsibility to fill me up. I have to find some happiness, some fulfillment, some joy within myself, because that is the most attractive part. So I can't control whether they're going to read the book, whether they're going to listen to the podcast, whether they're going to invest as much time and energy into this as I am. But I have to work on the things that I can control. In that moment when everything feels like it's exploding and you have no control over anything, you do control what you do in that moment. And at the end of the day, if you're working on yourself and you're working on understanding what part of this you own, because there is no such thing as it being all the other person's fault. What do I own? What do I need to fix in myself? Even if this was not going forward, even if this is the end, what do I want the story to be? That I'm vengeful, that I'm hurtful, that I am self-centered, that I am not loving? Or do I want the story to be that even in the worst time, she came forward with everything she had, or he came forward with everything he had? All the love and the generosity and the vulnerability and the honesty that they could find within themselves in that moment, so that even in the end, it doesn't have to be a hurtful disaster, which seems to be what most people make it. And I think, like, you guys,
That's so special.
you guys did such a good job. And I know that there was mentors involved, and there was a lot of advice, but I mean, if anyone and everyone could see the way you guys, and I know there's obviously there's good times, there's bad times. I knew you both then. So I had courtside seats to the show in that way. And as much pain and thoughts of whatever that was, failure, not being enough, you also didn't vengefully seek out to hurt each other. There may have been moments, there might have been thoughts. I think that's completely normal. But it wasn't a consistent, let me rally the troops and make this as painful for the other person because they made it painful for me. It's like, I got into this relationship because I loved that person. So what changed between then and now? Some stuff, some situations, some alignment issues that we didn't really know each other, that were not really the same trajectory of what we want in life. Okay, well, that's 50% my fault and that's 50% your fault. So why are we going to now make this a nightmare, especially if there's kids involved? Like,
See, you raise a good point, because that makes me think. That was so special, by the way. Like, many people often look at us and our family unit, and they shake their head. They don't quite understand it. It's taken us a long time to get where we are. And with Spencer, when there's kids involved, it's my personal belief that there's absolutely no point in bashing the other parent. it's not going to get you anywhere, because at the end of the day, that child is still going to love the other parent, regardless of what you say. So shame on you if you're bashing the other parent in front of the child. You liked each other at one point, and if you've chosen to go the path of not being together, it's kind of a win-win situation. You're not together anymore, so you've won. So be amicable for the child's sake, because you're going to be connected for the rest of your lives to begin with. So is it not easier? Just, you don't have to be best friends. Like our group is a little bit of an anomaly because we are so close. I don't think everybody is going to be as close as we are, but it's definitely doable.
Well, in fairness, we weren't close.
No.
I mean, I think at one point in time, I recall you telling me you wrote a passage on your mirrors in your house. Was it? And I think the passage was, "Don't ever let him hurt you again," or something like that. Do you remember that? I might be making it up.
That's possible.
I'm pretty sure it is.
It sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, no. I think it was, but I think it was legit advice that you had gotten from, whether it be a counselor or whatever. But it was, you legitimately felt like I had hurt you. I made a decision. It wasn't really a mutual, decision.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I had made a decision, and I had, some reasons. One of the reasons was, like I said earlier, it's not like it was a dire, like, holy fuck, I'm going to jump out of a window here. You're an amazing person, and which is a tribute to why we're so close. Is how, why, like, how you're so amazing and what you put into this. Because it was probably more you and more your feminine nature and more your willingness to work, towards something that really got us through, especially in those early days. But we didn't always get along. I mean, you'd taken Spencer to London. I recall not wanting that to happen. And then, but you were coming back and forth, and not like you took him away from you or anything like that, but I don't want to leave that as the impression. But there was, there was a ongoing process, like there is, I think, in anybody who goes through this, where, you're not seeing eye to eye, you're not agreeing on everything. But I think, in this whole conversation, there was a couple of key pieces that kind of fell into place. One was, and you talked about it, like, we created a vision together that on something that we could, you got two enemies in the background, right? Not enemies, but kind of at that stage, you're like, when a marriage is breaking down, it's like, everybody knows who's been through it. It's a very complex environment that has its own ecosystem of things going on, whether that's, people starting to date and moving on, and the other person's not moving on as quickly or whatever. And there's just all kinds of things, disparity in income or disparity in whatever. And so, but you and I came together on a vision, which was, to raise Spencer and be the best parents that we could be in a co-parenting environment, that we agreed that that's what we would do. And many parents do agree to that. And then it goes sideways because, and I think a lot of times, there's, like, Tennille, when you were talking earlier, a couple of things that kind of popped into my head, which was, the question was, well, what do men need? What do women need? And in the end, like, men, their egos are very fragile. We're pretty simple beings for the most part. Like, we need, praise, we need attention, and in our intimate relationships, we need sex. I mean, that's really, like, that's how frail the male ego. And I'm not being condescending, and I'm not being, negative towards the male ego, but it is really like, we want to be praised for the things that, even if we're not doing it right. So I guess part of this is an answer to kind of some of the strategies that, we invoked with each other, but, you were very, you always praised me for being a good dad. You never shit all over me for being a shitty husband. You know, there was always a level of attention there, especially when it was around Spencer. And so, you know, those two things were there. Obviously, we weren't having sex at the time, but and we're not now either. Just Neil for the for the record.
It's not that kind of family.
Exactly.
It's not that kind of family. Oh my god,
that's hilarious.
But I think, you know, that was, you know, and sometimes what can happen is, you know, that praise, that attention, and an intimate relationship, sex, women will withhold that as a means to control or find certainty inside the relationship, so that it becomes more of like a barter system. Like, if you do this, then I'll do this, right? You know, and so that would be, you know, the one thing on the women's side, you know, from all the learnings that we've kind of experienced over the years, it's like, you know, what do women need? It's, you know, attention, you know, AFT all the fucking time, or all the friggin' time, right? It's like women need attention constantly. And if, you know, if you are going to be in a relationship with a woman and the feminine energy, that's what they need. And so you need to be prepared to do that. And if you're not, you know, you're stacking the bases against you if you're not willing to provide that attention. And then I think, you know, the other two things is, like, a woman needs to feel like they're the most important thing to you. And the third is presence. You need our presence. You need us to be, and we need your presence too, but it's in a different way. Like you had said earlier, it's like, don't solve my problem, just be here, and, you know,
just casual conversation.
Yeah. Just listening. And one of the pieces of advice we got from someone, can't remember who it was at the time, but was, you know, when a woman is, you know, expressing her issues or problems or concerns and or emotions, you know, you just sit there and weather the storm from a guy's perspective. And then when they, you know, take that deep breath and pause for a minute, you say, no, keep going, tell me more. which is not in a man's that's not in the blueprint or the manual that we get that comes with us. So it's hard to do that, but if you can learn to sit, and you'll own your woman, you know, you will own your woman. And so I think it answers two questions. One, which is, you know, the conversation we had earlier, or the question I had asked earlier, which is, hey, what do you do when a relationship has gotten to the point where, you know, you don't know? Like, those are the kinds of things that you've really got to be, you've got to be willing to make the commitment to putting yourself aside and putting that other person in front of you. And leaders go first. It's not any different than in business. And you know, this conversation could, you know, you have an employee who's a long-term employee, or somebody who's high up in your business, and there's tension inside the relationship. Well, you can use these things, you know, praise them, you know, give them lots of attention. In the workplace, maybe not the sex thing, but and then, you know, for women, it's, you know, give them attention, AFT, and make sure that they feel like they're the most important thing. You know, I think I tried to do that. And I you know, I remember when we got divorced, I remember really sitting down and, you know, flushing out what the meaning of that was. And I think a lot of times, you know, there's a life cycle in, you know, there's a human life cycle, but there's also a life cycle in relationships, you know, the time where you first get attracted, and then, you know, puppy love, and then into intimate love, and whatever, you know, I don't know the exact stages off the top of my head, but there is a time where it comes to an end, whether that's through death or through divorce. The one thing I realized was, when we got divorced, that it was not the end. And I think a lot of people go, okay, you know, for whatever reasons they wanted out of the marriage, they're like, okay, I'm out. And it's really just the beginning. It's the beginning of a new relationship. And you have to have a vision for that relationship. My vision, I can tell you exactly what it was because I remember sitting down and flushing this out. I don't remember exactly how I did it, whether it was on paper or with, with a marriage counselor, but I believe it was just on my own. But I, I'm not a religious guy, but I was born and raised Catholic. And I remember, like when we got married, and the vows were to love, honor, and obey. And I asked myself the question, how can I, sorry, how can I continue to love, honor, obey in this new space, and in this new defined relationship, versus, love, honor, and obeying as a, in the marriage, like, that I was, when we got divorced, I felt like a complete failure. I remember it clearly, and I didn't have a path out. I didn't know how to fix it. And I think that happens with a lot of relationships. They just don't know how to fix it. And it's like, okay, well, let's just fucking end it. And it gets so toxic, that they decide to get out. But realizing like this was a new relationship that I could love, honor, and obey you, and meet your needs. That was kind of the vision I had set for myself.
It's so powerful. I've never looked at it that way, but it's because I'm thinking of different people in my life that are going through struggles, and wow, that statement alone can help so many people.
Well, I mean, it helped me to help us, or at least in my 50% participation. I don't know what meaning you put, and might be actually a decent, because I don't think we've ever talked about this ever.
But I do know that this has been a filter that you've continued to use, and you still use to this day. Is like, how do I best show up? How do I best honor and obey, honor, love, and obey?
Yeah, 20 years later,
it's still a thought process that you put yourself through, because we've spoken of this, and I only recently kind of processed that. I think maybe it was even around us talking about doing this podcast all together to try and flush out some of the tools that might help other people, and it was a very powerful statement. But as I look back on how you've handled different things as they've come up in each other's lives, not just one or the other, I think it's been one of the guiding principles that has really made your relationship flourish and as successful of a co-parenting and friendship as possible. And even if you took that down to, when this all started, we weren't on speaking terms, all of us, and you still managed to do that for both of us.
Yeah, so defining not on speaking terms.
Okay, I apparently took us there.
These two ladies couldn't be in the same room with each other, and I remember being at like hockey games, and I'd be going from the stands on one side to the other side, trying to divide my energy between you guys. But one of those things, and ultimately, like, I think at one point in time, Tennille and I had, we'd gotten to this point where, it was, for me, it was a massive conflict internally, because I had decided, and probably in fairness, not communicated it as effectively and out of fear or whatever, but that I would, love, honor, and obey Terri, as best I can, not being in an intimate relationship. And so it was hard for me to balance that and feel like I had integrity with who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up. And I think eventually I finally just kind of said like, this is what I have to do. It's like, but we have so many friends, and this is, I started the podcast saying, like, we have so many friends right now who are going through these times where they're struggling in their post-divorce situations. And I hear like the stuckness isn't a word, but
It's like the internal conflict.
yeah, it's such a struggle. Like, they can't seem to get out of the conflict or the problem, and they're living in it. And it's like anything. The more you resist something, the more it persists.
Yes.
Equal opposite reaction, right? So it's like if you put pressure on somebody, they're going to put pressure back on you, the equal amount of pressure. And so that's that whole concept of if anything you resist will persist. And then understanding that the past can't be changed. We can't change the past. You've got to be able to live with what is and accept that, okay, here's where we are, here's what's been done, and living in the past only equals pain. So you've got to be able to move on from that, and people struggle with it.
I think you just sparked a memory here. Tennille is the one that broke the ice with the book Loving What Is. Yes. Because initially when you guys started dating, I'll never forget the day.
None of us will.
But you reflect, because I've learned so much from you guys over the years, and you reflect back on. I reflect back on it, and I think we've spoken about this, but I think there was a jealousy factor because Tennille and I were friends prior to you guys dating, and then you guys started dating, and I think I was just jealous because I was jealous at the time that she picked you. And then that ruined our friendship because it was like, not the whole bro code thing, but you guys got together. And I was jealous for many, many years. I'm not anymore because I know the meaning behind jealousy and envy. You guys really are incredible together. Like, you really are. And Tennille is the one, because I know the conflict it caused you at the hockey games, and we would parent-teacher meetings, and Tennille would come to the parent-teacher meetings, and I was uncomfortable with that, but I didn't say anything because we're adults. You don't have to sit here and bash each other. That's what I can say to the listeners. And Tennille is the one that I think you just brought it to my house. I think that the book was left at my door or something.
I think how it went is, I was at a pretty bad place and had done.
We were separated.
Yeah, we were separated at the time, and it was a very deep reflection time, and some of that had honestly had to do with co-parenting and being part of Spencer's life and imparting on him, some of my rules and the way in my head I might have thought I was doing the best thing, but it was causing tension in our relationship in terms of Spencer and I, because I was so academically driven. I had so many rules about how you should make your bed and clean your room and do all that. And it was like, just, he's a young boy, and I'd never had a young boy in my life. I had no idea what I was doing. Yeah. I was riding on whatever instinct I had, not having had birth to, he's the greatest gift in my life. He's taught me more than anybody. I'm going to get teary-eyed. But at that point, I reached a point that it was like, if I fucked up my relationship, that's on me. I'll own that. There is no reason I need to fuck up my relationship with Spencer, and there's no reason that I can't repair the relationship with you, or at least own it and say, I have stood on the other side of a hockey arena. I have done all of those things.
You've never talked about this before.
Never. I have done all of those things because I made it about me.
Thank you.